for the delay here. We had a bit of a bit of some technical difficulty, so I'm real sorry about that. I'm going to go ahead and try and make sure that we get us going here. I had to go to an undisclosed location. So here we are right now in Boston. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning for some of you. It is a steamy evening in Boston, and we clearly had some technical difficulties. I'll try and make sure on the other end we give ourselves enough time to try and get through a number of these questions. As you know, this is where we're looking at the Back2BU, and I've got a few folks who will be joining us along the way so that we can make sure that we can answer your questions. I'm going to ask folks to put your questions in the Q&A section of this chat, and not the chat, the Q&A of this webinar, and we're going to do our best to get through those. I'm going to try and so that we get common questions answered for you and do it as soon as possible. First things first, as I said, on my walk over here, I saw a lot of flags at half-mast, and they were there for John Lewis. And John Lewis is someone who is not only legend, not only icon. I would not be here, and many of us wouldn't be here were it not for his works. So I need to make sure that I recognize him and remind you too that Boston University some years ago gave Representative Lewis a honorary degree, so it was fantastic for him to be here. So salute, salute, salute. So here's what we're going to do. I want to give you a brief overview, and then I've got a few folks who join us, and we want to make sure that we can get your questions answered. So the university, as you know, has made some commitments designed to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and also to support the well-being of this community as well as your well-being as well. The sorts of things that we've done range from regular COVID testing to limiting the density of people in our buildings. And they're described in the Back2BU guide. You may have seen it in some form, and we try to make sure that we update it and keep things in there as current as possible. And I'm talking to students. So as a student who'll be living, in some cases, working and attending classes on campus this fall, you all have a critical role, just like I do, everyone does, in trying to minimize transmission of COVID-19 within the university community. So the university is going to be requiring that you make your own health and safety commitments in addition to those that are made by the university. Let me give you a few of them. But before I do that, it's important that you remember that if at any point you're unable to meet these commitments, the university expects you to remain off campus and complete your semester remotely. And if you don't take this step for yourself, unfortunately, the university will prohibit you from participating in any in-person campus activities, including classes or living here. That'll be a job that I have to do, and I hope that I don't have to do that, that we'll all step up and be the adults that I know you are, and you'll make those good decisions for yourself. Here are some of the things that we have as expectations for our students. We want you to follow university health requirements that include wearing a face covering to physically distance and to hand wash and sanitize. We want to make sure that you complete a symptom attestation, and you're going to hear more about this each day, every day. And that means prior to going to the campus, if you live off campus, or if you're a resident on campus in the student residences, before you leave your room. If you report positive symptoms, you'll be expected to respond to a BU medical professional who contacts you for follow-up. You got to respond to that person, including following any instructions regarding testing for COVID-19. Now, if you're required to undergo testing as a result of reporting positive symptoms, you'll be expected to remain where you live and to minimize contact with others until a negative test result is obtained. We expect you to schedule testing and report to an on-campus BU testing site for asymptomatic surveillance testing based on an assigned test frequency, and you'll receive that information too. And if you're informed by BU medical professionals or by your own primary care provider that you have a positive result from symptomatic or asymptomatic testing and you live on campus, you'll be expected to isolate where you live. And if you live if you live off campus, you'll be expected to isolate where you live. And if you live in on-campus housing, you'll be moved to an isolation housing and you'll isolate there. And in order to leave isolation and return to campus, you must be fever-free and symptom-free for 72 hours without medication, and 10 days must have elapsed from the onset of your symptoms. And if the university determines that you are a close contact of another individual in the university community who's tested positive, you'll be expected to follow the university's directive to quarantine for 14 days. If you live in an on-campus housing arrangement, you'll be moved to quarantine housing and will be quarantined there. And if you live off campus, you'll be expected to quarantine at the place where you live for 14 days. So please also understand that this is based upon public health circumstances, and university guidance and protocols are likely going to change. And I learned during COVID that sometimes those changes happen rather abruptly. And so we hope, and I hope, that you keep yourself informed and you follow any new protocols that may be out there. All right. So those are important sorts of things. I will reiterate them at the end of all of this. Now, I think I see a few folks who are coming into the space. Let me just introduce them a bit so that we know who they are, so that we can answer some questions for you. I see Dean Mariette de Christina, who is here. Good to see you, Dean. Peter Smikowski. Oh, and by the way, you all, because this is COM, you should know this is the Dean of the College of Communication. I see Peter Smikowski, who handles our dining and housing and some of the other auxiliaries. So he is in the house here with you as well. I see Judy Platt. Judy Platt is our Director of Student Health Services, Dr. Judy Platt, and she's got plenty of things that she'll be talking to you about as well. And I see Sue Kennedy, who is our Associate Provost for Undergraduate Affairs, and she is the person who's thinking really hard about a number of sorts of things that are important for undergraduate education, and I'm sure you have questions. So let's get right down to it. Dr. Platt, why don't we start with you? As you know, a lot of people want to figure out and know a lot about what is this testing, what's it mean, and how does all this work? Do I have to use the long swab, the short swab? What's the testing, and how do we work that? So let me bring you in there.
Sure, Dean Elmore. And part of the benefit, I suppose, of all of us having to live through COVID is that there's a lot of medical information that has been already given to the public in a variety of ways. So people know that question to ask about what the swab is going to look like. But just to provide a little bit of framework for this, the type of testing that we're doing at BU is really important. I mean, it goes without saying that if someone has symptoms as part of that daily symptom attestation that Dean Elmore mentioned, that we're going to want you to get tested if you have symptoms that are suggestive that you could have COVID. And that's something that certainly in the United States has been happening, regularly. But what BU is doing is asymptomatic testing or surveillance testing. And what that is regular testing of our community, not just students, but also faculty and staff, so that we can help root out those cases of COVID that may not have symptoms, because we've all certainly heard about the concerns with people passing on COVID but not having those symptoms. So the type of surveillance testing that we're doing is in addition to the testing that you might have if you develop symptoms. And that testing will be done on frequencies that will be announced, I think, fairly soon in the coming week or so, in terms of how often will our community be tested. But most people can expect at least weekly testing. And again, that's to determine those cases of COVID quickly, to offer education and support for people who end up getting diagnosed with COVID, and then providing them with education, or if they're living in housing on BU's campus, to actually move into designated isolation spaces on campus or quarantine spaces on campus if you're a close contact. The type of testing that we're doing is called an anterior nares swab. It's a PCR test, which is the most common type of test that's done here in the United States and probably worldwide as well. And it involves taking not a long swab, but something the size of a standard Q-tip, and just placing that Q-tip right at the front of the nose on both sides, putting it into a container, and then handing it over for processing. So students, faculty, and staff will actually be collecting their own specimens. You'll receive instructions on how to do this, and you'll have support at the collection sites around campus. But it won't take much time, and I can say from having done it, it's fairly painless.
And I'll also ask, some folks are asking, when I move in, will I be tested?
That's a great question. So yes, we are doing entrance testing for our community as people come onto campus. It's not going to be the first thing you do with your suitcases, but it will certainly be done in close proximity as students are moving onto campus. And that's to give us an idea of what the prevalence is at one point in time, and also to be able to quickly, again, move students into isolation housing or give them advice about isolating as needed.
And there are a few folks who are trying to move in who are asking, will I have to swab if I'm a helper? If I'm that one helper that's supposed to be moving in, will I have to also swab and be tested?
Helpers will not have to swab and be tested. And maybe I should remove the S and say your helper will not have to swab and be tested, because we are encouraging everyone to pack lightly, pack minimally, and just bring one person with you to help. You'll get your workout at Move In this year, but that's part of the whole de-densification process. So helpers will not be required to test and swab, but certainly we ask everyone coming onto campus, whether you're someone helping with the move-in, whether you're a student moving in yourself, if you have symptoms, reschedule your move-in day. If your helper has symptoms, ask them to see if they can, get some rest and bring someone else to campus with you. All of us taking these individual health practices to heart is what keeps our whole community safe.
And Dr. Platt, of course, everyone is asking the big question. Okay, so I'm from a state that might be considered right now a hotspot. Will I need to quarantine, or is it only reserved for those students who are traveling from abroad? Can you help us out with this whole quarantine thing?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't envy the people that are in public health positions trying to deal with quarantine. And I think, Dean Elmer, as you mentioned, a lot of things with COVID have changed, and some of them have changed rather abruptly. And quarantine is this issue that we are, like many institutes of higher ed, trying to condense down into easy to understand information that we can give to the community. I will say that there are two types of quarantine. There's quarantine related to travel, because you may be coming from an area that is considered a high-risk area for transmission. And then there's quarantine related to being identified as a close contact. I think the questions that I receive most often are quarantine related to travel. And currently in Massachusetts, and remember, this is subject to change, but currently in Massachusetts, there is an advisory to self-quarantine for any individuals coming to Massachusetts that are outside of that New England corridor of states, New York and New Jersey, that are considered exempt from quarantine. So we know that people are trying to make plans and trying to move back in. We are urging everyone to self-quarantine. And even if that doesn't mean that you're put into a specific quarantine room on campus, there are still measures that you can take to really stay at home, stay in place, not really travel around campus except to get meals and to come for testing. And so we'll provide more information in the next week or two about how quarantine will look. But for now, I encourage all students who are traveling to campus, minimize your contact before coming to campus. That's the most proactive thing you can do before you travel. And then as you travel, be mindful of practicing good hand hygiene, wearing facial coverings. There still will be the need to self-quarantine upon arrival to Massachusetts, consistent with that travel advisory. But it will look a little different than the quarantine for close contacts, which is really based on an actual risk as opposed to a theoretical risk.
Well, thank you, Dr. Platt. So if we go to you for a little bit here, there are a couple of questions that have come up that I think you and also Dean DeChristina might want to answer. So some students are wondering about a couple of things. Will there be any changes to the academic calendar because they're hearing about other changes that might be afoot at other colleges and universities? And then folks are wondering, can I maybe start remotely and then do in person, or vice versa of some sort?
Those are great questions. Thank you so much, Dean Elmore. Yes, we've been having a lot of conversations about the academic calendar, as have other institutions. I believe we will have a decision and announcement made this week. For now, the current academic year calendar is in place and will be so until an announcement is made that would change that decision. And as far as perhaps starting remotely and then coming to campus and taking in-person classes, or doing the reverse, that is very much doable. That is one of the premises of LFA to begin with, learn from anywhere. I would say that it is really, really important to be in touch with your faculty. If you are doing if you're starting from one place and then coming to campus, be in touch with your faculty member. It won't be quite as simple as just showing up for class, because many classes will have a rotation schedule that's set, but it is definitely doable. And I suspect that there will be students that that may choose to go home for Thanksgiving and then conclude their semesters while they are out of the Boston environs.
And so just remind folks, if you can, please use the Q&A function. We're going to try and get through as many questions as possible. This is the session that's particularly aimed at communications. And because here was one of those other questions. Dean, how is WTBU and BUTV10? How's that going to work with the close quarters and the distancing that we've got to make sure of?
Oops. Thanks so much, Ken. First of all, I muted myself and then unmuted again. Thanks for the good question. Appreciate it. I'd like to also introduce Senior Associate Dean Dustin Supa at this time because, hey, Dean Supa, we've been working really hard. There are 442 different classes and then a whole plethora of student activities to make sure that when we all return to campus, we'll be able to do them in as safe, socially distanced manner as possible. And I think we're still working through what we're doing specifically with TBU in the studios. And I didn't know if Dean Supa had any further news, but we're actually doing that right now with the faculty members on the student different activities.
So TBU, the class, will be operating as normal. We've taken a look at that space. We've measured it 3 times, and we're good to operate that class as an in-person experience. In terms of some of the other things that happen within the studio itself, we're looking at trying to schedule the opportunity for students who are working on television shows for a non-credit environment to still be able to do that. Probably we'll be working on various schedules, and those schedules may look different than they have in the past. But we actually have an opportunity to have 10 students in the studio at any given time, given the space constraints. So we'll be able to operate pretty efficiently from that regard. With regard to radio, many of our over the summer, many of our sound engineers were very hard at work making sure that we would have the opportunity for remote uplinks for our radio. So we will. Obviously, we'll still have the radio space and still be able to operate within that space with enhanced cleaning protocols and space protocols in place. But we're pretty confident that students will be able to access both the television and radio studios, albeit probably slightly on a different schedule than what they're used to.
You look like you're in a radio studio there yourself there, Dee. So there were questions about internships and the comm equipment rental. How have we thought about all of those things too?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dean Elmore. We've certainly been working on plans for all of them, including ways to take the equipment for longer periods, for instance, so we don't have to clean it as often, and working out a few changes in the courses to enable that. And, just generally kind of working through it all. There are 422 different classes, as I mentioned, for comm in the fall, and it's just taking us a little bit of time to work it through. I see some questions about when will we know exactly about the classes and how the rotations will look. And I would say give us a few days. I think maybe another week or so. We're actively working through that right now.
Peter, talk to us a little bit about move-in. A few folks are asking what we've done to depopulate, if you will, some of our residences, and how you see move-in happening for people.
Thank you, Ken. Well, first of all, let me see if I can unpack that just a bit. Not to use a pun, but students are and certainly a helper are welcome. We as Judy Platt mentioned, try not to come with a U-Haul. There are Targets, there's Walmart. If you need to buy some sheets and pillows, there's plenty of that availability. So let's start with how we have de-densified the residence halls. All of the quads, these are rooms with 4 beds, have been converted to doubles, and all of the triples have been converted to doubles, with the exception of 575 Comm Ave, and that we held back as a triple because that has an in-suite bath and that's shared by 3 people. We have turned on the student scheduling system for move-in, and we have extended the move-in period by 2 weeks. So we begin on August 15th, and that runs through August 31st. And if for any reason you're delayed, we can certainly work with you on any delays that you might have. If you're going to be arriving after August 31st, just drop a note to housing, and we can certainly work with you. The move-in periods have been broken down into a morning slot and an afternoon slot. And we are limiting the number of students to 370 students per morning and afternoon session. And that will be spread across 150 residences. So we have a fairly large residential hall system. It's very well distributed across the campus. So what this does is it helps us manage density. It helps us avoid overcrowding, even in the large residences. And the scheduling system, really, unless you're a sibling or you're coming as twins, or you can only move into a room with one person at a time. So as time goes on, roommates will arrive. If you have a roommate or several roommates, depending upon the type of accommodation you've selected in the fall. And but again, that helps us manage the crowding and the density, and it will make that move-in much more smooth.
And what about dining, Peter? There are questions here about dining and how that'll work.
Well, so all of the retail locations, we have a little over 25 retail locations on campus, including the George Sherman Union, which I'm pleased to report the renovations there are progressing, and the GSU will be open. Probably not the first week of September, probably more mid-September, some of those new retail locations. But all retail locations will be on the Grubhub platform at no additional cost to students, so that mobile ordering can be done ahead of time, so that when you arrive at your destination in that location, that order is going to be ready to go. So that will, again, help alleviate any congestion in lines. All 4 dining halls will be open. If you go to the dining website and you go to the Back2BU section, it will list how the dining operations will scale beginning on August 15th and then working their way to the first day of classes. Dining halls, we have been working all summer on menus. I know our culinary team's been working very hard. Yes, there will be a lobster night, I'm pleased to report. It'll be a little bit different. We won't be cracking shells. But there will be a lobster night. Dining halls, essentially, we will be using takeout containers for all meals. I think there will not be any self-service in the dining halls. All food will be prepared fresh daily by meal period. Students will certainly arrive in the dining halls. It'll be contactless. So Marciano Commons, where you used to have to give us a fingerprint, you won't be doing that. You'll be tapping your card and you'll come into the dining halls as you will the other locations. You'll select your food. It'll either be plated for you in a takeout container, and in some cases there will be some prepared salads and sandwiches and those things that are ready to go. But you can expect a very robust experience from a dining perspective. If you have special nutritional requirements, food allergies, special diets, we're still working with our Sargent College nutritionists to make sure that you get the nutrition that you need during the course of your stay.
And will you be able to sit in a dining room, or is this really a total takeout world?
No, you'll be able to sit in the dining rooms. The seating is reduced significantly. There will be a number of singles across the dining halls, and then there will be some tables for households. Maybe we can talk a little bit about households either.
Go right ahead.
Sure. So as you think about moving in, and we think about how we're going to manage households, a household really becomes a group of your suite mates, your flatmates. In the case of a first-year residence like Warren Towers, a floor of one of the towers will be split into 3 to 4 household groups, and it'll be just like you've done in a normal semester. You'll work together. You'll schedule daily hygiene visits for the bathrooms based on whoever's schedule needs to essentially be prioritized. And in those areas, you will be able to find disinfecting wipes where you can clean the surfaces as you're using a bathroom, and then cleaning the surfaces when you leave the bathrooms. If you're in an apartment or a suite and you have an in-suite bath, we will provide a starter kit for you to be able to clean those bathrooms. And as always, students who are in apartments or private settings with in-suite baths have always been responsible for managing the cleaning in those units.
Dr. Platt, anything you'd add to that?
I think Peter has done a really good job explaining how the household concept works. And I think this was already mentioned, but how we're addressing the COVID-19 guidelines for this is the de-densification of those rooms down from the triples and quads to doubles. We know that having an engaging experience also involves being able to be socially close, and sometimes perhaps even physically close with some other members in your household. So it's really, it's really important for each member of the household and then each member of our community to just think about the ways that you would want your household to be kept, and make sure that you clean after yourselves, practice good hand hygiene. That's really going to be paramount to the health and safety of the household and the whole community as well.
Thank you.
Ken, and I would just add in the shared spaces and the common spaces, our facilities management team will be doing deep cleaning in between those breaks. They'll be going through the common areas, doing things like light switches, hallways, elevator buttons, just a constant emphasis on enhanced cleaning throughout the course of the day and evening.
And Dean DeChristina and also Provost Kennedy, what about classrooms? Are we de-densifying classrooms? And what's the cleaning like in those spaces? And what about those common areas where people usually hang out indoors?
I guess I'll start this one. We are de-densifying classrooms, and that's going to look a little bit different when everybody comes back to campus. We are adhering to state and local guidelines. So, we want to make sure that we have that good 6-foot distancing. So your classrooms will look different, and that's why we're employing rotations. So depending on the class size, the number of students enrolled, the classroom itself, you may be in class once every other time, once every third time, and attending remotely. I believe there will be, as Peter mentioned, enhanced cleaning all around the campus. And I believe there'll also be cleaning materials in the classrooms.
Thanks, Sue. I just want to add to that, to Sue's excellent answer, that when we were working through the classes in COM so far, I'll shout out to Dean Supa and the chairs of the various departments. We very carefully made sure that we were just talking about rotations, that it's not more than every other. So you'll have an in-person experience plus some remote experiences, which is part of the Learn from Anywhere pedagogy, but you'll be able to go every other. So if your class was ever, once a week, you'll get there every other, and it won't be multiple weeks in between those really important in-person experiences.
And Dean, I would imagine the Learn from Anywhere also works if I start class in person, I get sick, I can still remotely, if I'm up to it, I can still do remote coursework too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can absolutely do that. And I'd like to add one more thing to that, Dean Elmore. Mm-hmm. One of the things I know many COM parents are concerned about, especially if you're in the film and TV program, is that, that a lot of that is intrinsically hands-on. So what the faculty have worked really hard to create an in-person experience and a remote experience that will equally serve as a prerequisite for future classes. And the remote experience has more pre-visualization experience, things like that, in cinematography and production, and the in-person one will have a little more hands-on at the time, but the faculty have committed to continuing to work with those students past this COVID-19 period so that they get that equipment time over time. So if you're remote or if you're in person, we'll make it work out for you.
Awesome, thank you. I want to see if I can get Amanda Conley to come into the picture for us. Hey, Amanda.
Hi, Dean Elmore.
Amanda Conley, tell folks what you do here because there are questions that students up your alley have.
So many. So my name is Amanda. I'm the Associate Director for Student Services in the International Students and Scholars Office. And I am happy to try to answer questions that our international students have. I've been typing a couple in the Q&A, so yeah, you may have gotten an answer to your question in the Q&A.
Go ahead and if you could do those for us.
Yeah, I think so. Some of the questions that I'm seeing from our international students have to do with uncertainty about being able to return to the United States. We know right now we have a lot of questions about when will our embassies and consulates open? If you have an appointment scheduled, does that appointment actually hold true? Unfortunately, we don't know the set answers to those questions. We have heard that some embassies and consulates are reopening. We've been hearing actually this week a number of success stories for current and new students being able to get visas. But we also know that some embassies and consulates are not open yet. So if you have an appointment booked, it may end up being canceled. It may end up being rescheduled. So unfortunately, our international students are dealing with a lot of uncertainty, and they're having to be really flexible this summer. We also have a lot of travel restrictions in place that are making it very, very difficult for students to figure out how to return to the United States. So I think a couple of the questions I'm seeing in the Q&A are having to do with students who maybe don't want to study remotely. I know for our comm students, there's a lot of great stuff that happens that you guys really feel like you want to be in person to do. So if you determine that you wanted to take a leave of absence for the semester, I would encourage you to reach out to your ISSO advisor who would help you walk through that process. You would work with the University Service Center to have that approved and work with us on all of the immigration, your CVIS record, and how you would be able to return when you're ready. We do hope that many of you will continue and enroll for the fall semester, but we know for some of you, a leave of absence might feel like the right option. So reach out to your ISSO advisor. I will ask that you be patient with us right now. We're receiving a really, really high volume of inquiries. So it's taking the ISSO just a little longer than we might like to be able to get back to everybody. So be patient with us when you're emailing us, but we will do our very best to get back to you. If you have specific questions, we have a lot of information on the ISSO website, especially around if you need a new travel signature on your I-20, very specific instructions for how to do that. If you want to take a leave of absence, we have very specific instructions for how to do that. So I would encourage you to use our website as a resource because a lot of your questions are going to be answered there.
Thanks, Amanda. Dina and Dean, a couple of questions. It seems like everybody wants to do AdLab. What's the deal with AdLab? Also, there's this question too. Are you expecting students to wear face coverings or masks in class as well and around the studios too?
First of all, on the masks, yes, we absolutely are. I'll be wearing my mask, and so my daughter, BU grad, has sewed me a couple of them, so I'll be sporting them around campus and hope to see you there. Dean Supa, I don't remember specifically about AdLab. If you do, that would be really helpful.
Sure. So we're still looking at what spaces are available and what the best approach to AdLab is. Right now, it looks like there will be both in-person components to both AdLab and PR Lab, as well as remote components. So from the student perspective, that would probably be most akin to the hybrid type model that we will be type of course that you hear about. So there'll be both of those components.
Thank you.
All right. Dr. Platt, a few folks have asked, are we allowed to leave campus and come back? And if we go into Boston or go home and visit, do we have to test when we come back?
So that's a great question. I think we're putting a lot of measures in place so that we're really helping to monitor the entire campus. But if someone goes home on a weekend and comes back, unless you notify us or reach out to us, we're not going to be aware of that movement around. So we're relying on our whole community. Again, this is not just students. This is students, faculty, and staff to make good choices about if you do decide to leave the area and come back in. And certainly there are ways that you can travel across a state border, or there are ways that you can stay within your own state border. And it really comes down to those individual health practices that we're all maintaining. And it doesn't matter where you're coming from. Those are really what help to keep you at decreasing your chances of contracting the virus and from passing it on to others. So I think the short answer is, yes, we're not going to be, preventing people from moving around and living their lives. We are trying to put safeguards into place, though, so that as people do that, they adhere to the public health guidelines that are so important. And also, again, with the frequent testing and frequent symptom attestation, we are hoping to catch cases early that might not have been caught otherwise if we didn't have this regular testing. And in terms of keeping you appraised of what to do, I just want to give a shout out to the Ad Lab, because they are the creators of our student-facing public health campaign written in the student voice. So great work to our students for getting the word out there about how we can all take a shared responsibility in keeping our campus safe.
You know, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, because there'll be a lot of nudges that people will get on campus, me included, you included, students, faculty, staff. But, you know, it's really what we do when someone's not watching us, right? It's going to really be about how I socialize off campus, how I'm mindful of keeping the good habits that I've got as well, you know, how I'm not going into crowded places that are packed, how I'm making sure that I stick with Massachusetts culture. And if you're walking around Massachusetts, certainly in Boston, people have got face coverings on and they give you dirty looks if you don't do it. You know, so it's going to be a lot. You know, I keep Judy Platt in my head all the time when I think I want to touch my face or not put a mask on. But, you know, all these things are really important. And I think just as important when you don't have the nudge to do these sorts of things. Now, Dr. Platt, a few folks I think are asking about a little bit more by way of specifics in terms of insurance. Are there fees for all these quarantines and isolation? And what kind of care, medically speaking, does a person receive when they're in quarantine or if they're in isolation?
So those are really great questions. Let me start with just walking us through if someone is in quarantine or isolation. And those mean different things. So quarantine, again, is that state where you don't have symptoms necessarily, but you may be at risk of higher transmission because you've traveled or because you've been identified as a close contact of someone. So if you are on campus in residential housing, Student Health Services, Residence Life, and the Housing Department will work to provide you with quarantine or isolation housing as needed. And then we're going to check in with you a lot. We'll have daily telehealth visits until you tell us to stop having them with you, to monitor your symptoms and to make sure that all of your healthcare needs are brought to the forefront and addressed in a timely fashion. And there is no charge for any of that. That's all included in the health and wellness fee and the total cost of tuition. So if you move to quarantine or isolation housing on campus, or if you have health providers checking in with you daily, that's part of the package deal to supporting our campus in a healthy way. If you're off campus, then we're going to give you information about how you can safely quarantine or isolate at home. And it is possible to do. It just takes some attention to some of those habits and details of daily life that you need to just be cognizant of. And they're all of the important public health measures that we're all individually doing anyway. A word about insurance. Before I forget, the surveillance testing that we are doing also is covered by the health and wellness fee. So there is not a charge for surveillance testing. Now, in terms of insurance, we've been in a pretty good situation, at least here in the United States, that most insurance carriers are covering costs related to COVID-19, whether that's testing because someone has symptoms or if that involves hospital care. So you may need to use your insurance if you're going off campus. And I certainly encourage everyone to make a really informed decision about healthcare insurance. It's important every year. But I think one of the things that COVID-19 has showed us is really the importance of having health insurance in place. The last thing you want to do is end up in an emergency room and not be clear if you have health insurance. So all students who are enrolled at least 3/4 time in the university are automatically enrolled in the student health insurance plan. That plan covers you here in Boston, in Massachusetts, across the US, even internationally. So it's a good plan that exceeds, but the incoming email from Student Services about your immunizations includes a student health insurance guide. Please read it, learn about
Dr. Platt,
examples right from your very own students so that you can make a decision. Oops.
All right, I think we're losing you. You're going in and out for a moment there. Maybe it's my machine, but I think you might be going in and out.
No, I think it might be me. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
So just check out our website, bu.edu/SHS. There's a whole section dedicated to student health insurance. Make sure that you have health insurance that covers you here in the state of Massachusetts. It's required by Massachusetts state law, but know that we will provide coverage for you for the COVID-related initiatives here on campus. And all students are welcome to come to Student Health Services regardless of your health insurance.
Thank you. I'm going to get Julie Wickstrom in here. Julie oversees our financial aid. I know a few people had some questions about whether or not there'd be an impact or an effect on their financial aid with things like Learn from Anywhere, leaves of absences, those sorts of things. Julie, could you just give us a quick overview and maybe a place where people could go for a little bit more information?
Sure can. So I encourage you to check out our website at www.bu.edu/FINAID, FINAID. There's actually a new section related to COVID-19 and Back to BU, Learn from Everywhere and Anywhere, to give you lots of great information. If students do decide to stay home and be 100% remote, you do have different costs than other students, so we would be taking a look at your financial aid to determine if an adjustment is needed. But otherwise, you really shouldn't anticipate much change in your financial aid. One thing I do want to make sure that people do know is for this year, given all the circumstances, full tuition scholars are not required to live on housing. Normally they would have been. So that is something we've waived for this year so that you can take advantage of the opportunity to learn from anywhere if that's what makes you the most comfortable. If you do have changes in your financial circumstances, because we know a lot of families have been impacted, definitely let us know about that. We have a great appeal form on our website that allows you to complete the form and tell us more about your information.
Thanks, Julie. Marietta Sue, do you think study abroad and particularly the LA program, this is COM, might be one of those things that might return anytime soon?
Well, yeah, we've put study abroad on hiatus for the fall, but the spring is still open, and we're going to hope for the best and would love to return to LA in a big way if that's possible in the spring. But of course, we don't know yet. And I think we won't know until sometime during the fall. Sue, I'm not sure if we have a timing on that, but I think that's about right, isn't it?
That is right. And, you know, again, like this entire situation, we need good guidance on that from our public health colleagues.
All right. Well, thank you. I just brought John Battolino in, and I know that Dean Supa also mentioned this. You're all working to make sure there are activities, right? We're not just going to have people standing around. There are activities that are planned, and there will be creative and safe. Isn't that right? Talk to me, both Dean Supa and Dean Battolino, please.
That is correct, Dean Elmore. And I'll tell you, I have been busy in the Q&A section. This is a calm crowd. These folks are always active on campus, and they want to know that they can continue to do that. And for new members of the community, yes, we are doing everything we can to hold on to some of our traditional programming, understanding that there's going to be some space capacity issues and limitations, but we're going to do everything we can to help you meet one another and create spaces where that you'll be able to make some real genuine friendships while you're here. I know that's important to you. It's important to all of our students. I will also say, as an actor of the Bay State soap opera, my last episode was filmed virtually, and it was awesome. You should check it out. President Dixon, I think I stole the show, but whatever. It was a lot of fun.
They killed me off years ago. So
there are certainly, Dean Elmore, plenty of activities. And really, it's our clubs and organizations that introduce a lot of those activities to each other, and they watch out for one another, and they do forge these relationships. So I'm looking forward to certainly an interesting but active fall. Dean Supa?
You know, you're absolutely right, John. Thanks for that. You know, our activities are going to look a little bit different, right? Mm-hmm. But the core element of the activities within COM, you know, that gives the students the experiences that they need to progress, not only as in their academic career, but in their professional career. We're doing everything we can to make sure that students are going to have that experience. And so, like John said, it may look a little bit different, You may not have a large group of 35, meeting together. You might be meeting in groups of 5, socially distanced, masked up, but you're gonna get the experiences that you're used to getting, and we're really working hard to make sure that COM is delivering on the promise that all the students before you have fulfilled, and we know you will too.
Great.
Thank you, John. Peter, if I had some items that I stored and I just can't come and get them, what do you recommend I do?
Please come and get them. So if you've canceled your RLA, you will be receiving a message from housing about how to handle any items that you've left in storage. Returning to campus in the fall, your stored items. I can't say this will happen in every residence, but in some cases, your stored items will be already placed in your residence. In most cases, depending upon the amount of time that we have, you'll be able to pick them up in areas outside of your residence. So most returning students have used this storage program before. So it's, if you're on West Campus or living in 33 Aganis Way or 10 Buick Street, those trailers are generally parked right there on Aganis Way. There are trailers on West Campus and on South and East Campus as well.
All right. And Peter, how about this? Talk to me about the questions you feel like you're asked most often, if you can maybe get some of those out, and especially if we haven't covered them thus far.
Well, I've seen a number of questions, not just in this session, but in other sessions as well. And we've seen some coming into the housing site, that if a student is planning on deferring until the spring, what happens? What should they do? And if they're in campus housing, they should terminate the residence license agreement on or before August 1st. And if they choose to return to campus in the spring, in November, they will be able to complete a spring housing application. We always have a spring housing program. We always have the CGS cohort coming in the spring, and then there are other students as well starting in the spring. So that's not unusual. Students have asked if they're going to be able to hang on to their original room assignment or their roommate. And that we cannot guarantee. What we can guarantee is that we will make every reasonable effort to accommodate your room preferences that you indicate in your housing application, and that includes the roommates. We will work very hard. We just can't make that commitment at this point.
Okay. And I had a few folks ask whether or not they'd be able to work for dining services and catering this fall.
Please.
Okay, there we go. Dr. Platt, what do you feel like you're being asked most often, or a question that comes up most often that you feel like maybe we haven't gotten to?
So there's certainly a lot of questions that come up pretty frequently, given the public health nature of things. But one thing that I think is really important for people to know is that we recognize that this is going to require not just our whole community looking at the shared responsibility that we all have to practice good individual health practices, but also the need for very accessible student health services. So just as a point of reminder, we are still going to be providing health services beyond the COVID-related health services, because other things happen to people related to healthcare in addition to COVID. And we are actively augmenting our staff so that we are able to respond to all COVID-related questions, as well as basic healthcare needs that come across campus on a regular basis, whether that's through the primary care department, the behavioral medicine department, sexual assault response and prevention, athletic training, or wellness. So certainly, if you can't find the answer or you're struggling, reach out to us. One of the really nice ways in which BU actually feels small is the ability for all of us to be able to point you to the right place, even if the question that you have isn't directly related to our department. So I would just urge people to continue to reach out with questions.
All right. Provost Kennedy, how about you? Questions that you're hearing most often?
I think we've covered it a little bit. It tends to be about what the classroom is going to look like, and also the real amount of flexibility that students will have with the fall and with the LFA framework, the Learn from Anywhere framework. And I think, the faculty are excited to have students back and to be teaching. We want to make sure that there's a lot of communication happening, that students are talking with their faculty again if they decide to shift to remote, or if they decide to come to campus after having started in a remote fashion. As we've said, it's going to look a little bit different, but everybody is really excited to have you back. And we're thinking really, really hard about how to make the in-person experiences special and have a lot of impact.
Dean Supa, Dean DiChristina.
The biggest question we are hearing over and over again is exactly what am I going to do in my classes? Because as we've talked about, comm students, we love to get our hands on things. I say that as a former comm student myself, and just bear with us just a few more days. I mean, it's the reason why it's so complex. I mentioned the number of classes, the space issues. So we've had to figure out how to de-densify each classroom. And then it wasn't acceptable to us to have too many rotations through. We wanted to make sure we got you in as often as we could, safely doing so, and then have the remote components as well. So it's just taken a little while to do that well, but I think what we've seen from BU, and I'm proud of this as well, is sometimes we may answer a couple of days after some other universities, but our answer is really thorough and student-centered and focused.
Great. Dean
But did
Supa,
I miss
anything
something
there?
there? No, okay.
No, I did see, a lot of folks are asking about experiences, internships, things like that. Please know that we are doing everything we can. We're working the full flex of our alumni network to help provide internships. We are launching new programs within COM to give you professional experiences that are fully remote, that are both credit bearing and not credit bearing. So we are trying to think and come up with creative ideas and ways to provide everybody with the experiences that you're looking for. Some of you are involved with COM Lab this summer. We're going to continue that through the fall. I think that you will be pleasantly surprised with the number of opportunities that we are going to create for you.
Fantastic. And I'm assuming that everyone can contact your respective offices if they have questions. We just can't get to them all. I promised that we would take a little bit more time rather than just a straight hour, because we did start with some technical difficulties. So please feel free to contact these offices that you've heard. And I would also emphasize too that there are a lot of questions about the semester after the one that's coming up. And I remind folks about what Provost Kennedy and Dean DiChristina said. There are things that we don't know that far into the future. We're trying to work with and get us where we are right now, and really to work in, as I've heard you say, Provost Kennedy, to live in the suspense of not knowing. And that is something that we are all, I think, on a global level, trying to make sure that we can do as best as possible. This has been recorded, and you'll be able to take a look at that. Now, I'm going to ask all of my colleagues to mute themselves because I want to bring Oliver Porter, the president of our student government, into this. Come on in, Oliver.
How's it going, Dean Elmore?
Hey, what's going on, Oliver? Good to see you. And I want to thank the student government for working with us to put on 10 of these sessions. And I want to remind people that even though we had a focus today on COM, on the College of Communications, tomorrow we've got 2 more of these scheduled. One is at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, College of General Studies. Another one is at 8 p.m. tomorrow Eastern Standard Time for Sergeant College students. But anybody can come on and anyone can listen and anyone can watch these later. Now, Oliver, talk to me about the new normal challenge.
Definitely. So COVID-19 has turned our world upside down this year and required all of us to make sacrifices and adjustments as we figure out what the new normal looks like. BU is committed to having students back on campus this fall, as well as providing learning and engagement opportunities remotely. But the global pandemic will continue to impact all of our lives for the foreseeable future, whether we're physically on or off campus. For that reason, this summer, BU Student Government, Umoja the Black Student Union, the Dean of Students Office, and Innovate at BU are partnering to host the New Normal Challenge. This is an opportunity for students to embrace the entrepreneurial mindset and focus on developing recommendations, interventions, new events, or traditions, and so much more that will help the BU community begin to heal and reconnect while we transition to a hybrid community this fall. This is an opportunity open for all undergraduate students, no matter what age, no matter what college. This is for you. This is an opportunity to collaborate with other students on campus, both virtually and physically on campus. For more information, please check out the Innovate at BU website, and please follow BU Student Gov on Instagram because this will be an incredible opportunity that we will be kicking off within the next couple of days, and we would love to have you involved. So Dean Elmore, I'm extremely excited to see this unfold. I'm extremely excited to see the different recommendations, interventions, events, and traditions that our own community begins, because now more than ever, we need to unite as one. So let's make it happen.
Thanks, Oliver. And we'll post some information immediately following this so that people can see it and get some of that information that you talked about. It'll be right there. The website will be right up there. All right. So finally, folks, like you might be right now, and so many of us are, and many institutions, and we're not the only institution at Boston that is opening up this fall, but we are guided by public health advice and government directives, that be Massachusetts and the city of Boston. And what you just heard regarding rules and practices and planning and requirements, expectations, guides, advice for the fall, they are going to be updated and revised. So please keep track of some of the things that we're talking about here, and we'll revise them as we get additional government guidance and also everything else that goes with it. It goes without saying, and I'm going to reemphasize what Oliver said, we want to provide an environment that enables you to learn and to live here, and to make sure this is a safe place while we're in the midst of a global pandemic. But we want to make sure that we can make this as low risk as possible, and we will do all that together. So Oliver, thank you. Thanks to student government, and hopefully we'll see many of you tomorrow, and I certainly hope I'll see you tomorrow too.
Definitely.
All the best, folks. Be well. I look forward to welcoming you with open arms. Won't hug you, but I'll definitely have the sentiment there. Take care.